Taiwan, population 23 million, home to heavy industry, a thriving technology sector, and the world's third tallest building. Taiwanese infrastructure is among the most modern in the world, supporting high-speed rail, a developed highway system, and more cellular phones than people. Since the first free election in 2000, Taiwan has blossomed from centuries of martial law into a flourishing, substantive democracy. However, despite all the trappings of a sovereign state, the United States, the People's Republic of China, the United Nations, and the international community as a whole refuse to recognize Taiwan as such. Only 23 nations maintain formal diplomatic relations with Taiwan, including the Marshall Islands, Belize, and Vatican City. Dubious Chinese territorial claims to the island, the only impediment to Taiwanese international recognition, are based primarily on supposed historic rule over the island. The island of Taiwan is situated some 140 miles off the coast of Fujian province on mainland China. Archaeological finds indicate that the first Austronesian inhabitants migrated to the island between 10 and 30,000 years ago. At the time, much of the world's water was frozen at the poles, resulting in a land bridge to the island. These settlements persisted in partial isolation from the mainland, incorporating a steady trickle of refugees from Fujian into a distinctly aboriginal people, culture, and language. Successive Chinese dynasties wholly regarded the landmass as a barbaric enclave separate from the rest of the civilized Middle Kingdom. This attitude persisted until the golden age of European colonization. When the Dutch East India Company established its first trading post on Taiwan in 1622, after a brief skirmish, the Ming court permitted the establishment of trading posts on the island and travel through the surrounding waters. In 1626, the island settlements were captured by the Spanish, then promptly recaptured by the Dutch, but no European power was ever able to establish a self-sustaining settlement due to malaria and attacks by aboriginal Taiwanese. Following the period of half-hearted European colonization, a Ming admiral called Koxinga overthrew the Dutch rulers on the island and established a Chinese kingdom on the island for the first time in 1662. The short-lived kingdom was deposed after just 21 years by the new Manchu dynasty in 1683. These Chinese rulers brought with them huge waves of Fujianese immigrants fleeing turmoil and instability in China at the hands of collapsing dynasties and European exploitation. For the next 200 years of Qing rule, Chinese pushed aboriginal Taiwanese out of the fertile plains on the western coast of Taiwan into the rugged, jungle-covered mountains. On its deathbed, the Qing dynasty was defeated in the First Sino-Japanese War in 1885, ceding Taiwan to the Japanese Empire. For a period of 5 months, a group of Qing officials and generals declared Taiwanese independence as the Republic of Formosa, signifying the first independent Taiwanese nation-state. But the ragtag republic was swiftly crushed by a brutal Japanese crackdown. For the next half-century, the Japanese modernized and industrialized the island, but not without great human cost. While the roads, bridges, and railroads crisscrossed the island, the forced labor used to do so perpetuated a cycle of rebellion and reprisals between the tribal aborigines and the Japanese. During World War II, Taiwan's location made it a strategic node in Japan's campaign against mainland China and the Philippines. This further invigorated Japanese investment in Taiwan's industry, and subsequent American bombing of it. Following Japan's unconditional surrender, August 15, 1945, Taiwan was presented to the Republic of China under the Chinese Nationalist Party, the Kuomintang, and for the first time in 50 years, Taiwan and the mainland fell under the same government. However, the seeds of divergence had already been planted.
有很多不一样。台湾的人，活的还是依照中国传统在过生活，很多观念也是依照中国传统。那中国在文化大革命之后呢，很多观念都改变了，比如说他们男女平等啦，或者是很多中国就有的习惯习俗，全部都毁掉了。他们不是真正的中国人了。
While Taiwan's post-war economy tumbled into depression and hyperinflation, the Kuomintang's provincial government was marred by corruption and impeded by the cultural result of half a century of effective Japanese assimilation. Civil unrest spiraled out of control until what is known as the 228 incident. On February 27, 1947, Kuomintang police shot and killed a bystander following an altercation. Taiwanese, frustrated by the lack of self-government and stability previously provided by the Japanese, rioted, taking control of the majority of the island. Spontaneous student groups formed, calling for greater autonomy, an end to corruption, and even UN trusteeship or full independence. During the weeks of chaos across Taiwan, Chunyi, the Governor-General of Taiwan, assembled a large military force just over the strait in Fujian Province, China. On May 7th, his army arrived in Taiwan and engaged in a 3-day massacre, killing between 10 and 30,000 Taiwanese. The executions were both systematic and random. Taiwanese administrators under the Japanese and protest leaders were shot, but also an extremely large number of high school students were among the dead. Thus began the Kuomintang's 4 decades of White Terror. Dissidents were shot, imprisoned, or simply disappeared. All this time, Mao Zedong's communist guerrillas were gaining momentum in China. Immediately following Japan's surrender, the mainland was embroiled in civil war between American-backed Kuomintang government and the Soviet-funded communist rebels. After 4 years of ravaging civil war, what was left of the Kuomintang government under Chiang Kai-shek fled the mainland to the easily defendable island of Taiwan, taking with them China's entire treasury and all of the country's national treasures. Should Mao's army have tried to take the island by force, they would have been intercepted by the United States' 7th Fleet occupying the Strait of Taiwan. For the next half-century, both governments maintained that they were each the legitimate government of all of China, and that the other was nothing more than a rebel faction. The People's Republic of China, the communist government on the mainland, maintained some 200 cruise missiles pointed at the island at all times, and the Republic of China on Taiwan maintained the world's 7th largest standing army. Chinese unification had lasted a total of 4 years and 2 months. Conflict erupted sporadically between the two Chinas following the Civil War over a number of islands in the Taiwan Strait. The first Taiwan Strait crisis occurred in 1955, in which the PRC seized the Yijiangshan and Dacheng Islands. The crisis also included an extended artillery duel between the PRC mainland and the ROC-controlled Quemoy Islands. An invasion of Taiwan was only avoided by American nuclear brinkmanship in defense of its anti-communist ally. The second Strait of Taiwan crisis occurred 3 years later in 1958, when the People's Liberation Army, the PLA of mainland China, began intensely shelling the Quemoy and Matsu Islands. For 2 months the sides shelled each other, until the U.S. transferred long-range artillery to the ROC, and the PRC exhausted its 450,000 shell supply. Ironically, the spent casings landing on Quemoy have been recycled into cleavers and other steel products. Afterward, each side continued to bombard the other with propaganda on alternating days of the week. In 1996, Taiwan held its first free and fair presidential election, with Lee Teng-hui of the Kuomintang winning. However, the election of the most consequence was in 2000, when Chen Shui-bian of the Democratic Progressive Party won the election in the first transfer of power away from half a century of Kuomintang rule in Taiwan. Though the Kuomintang won back the presidency in 2008 and Ma Ying-jeou was elected in 2012, these elections are indicative of the transition Taiwan has had into a flourishing, vibrant democracy. Today, U.S. relations with both China and Taiwan are complex. Under the Taiwan Defense Act, the United States is empowered to sell arms of a defensive nature to Taiwan. Each presidential administration has sold multi-billion-dollar arms packages to Taiwan, including submarines, missile systems, helicopters, and even F-16s.
I think that there's a little bit to be said for the idea of consistency that the United States in the 70s, when it formally recognizes the PRC, it destabilizes the Taiwanese population in the midst of the Cold War. So all those examples that you talk about, anything past 1991 becomes a different calculation. But prior to 1991, wanting our allies to know that even if our policies might shift, our support for their sovereignty doesn't.
Other weapon systems have been purchased from countries like France, despite protests and threats from China. There's a reason for such massive defense spending. The PRC has threatened to attack if Taiwan declares independence.
It would seem that all Chinese claims on Taiwan are suspect.
The two main parties in Taiwan differ mainly on cross-strait relations. The current president, Ma Ying-jeou of the Kuomintang, ran on a platform of better relations with China, in contrast to the last president who advocated further separation from the mainland, and even independence. President Ma has pushed through reform that opened up tourism, postal mail, and travel between the two capitals. Because of continued PRC pressure on international bodies such as the United Nations and the World Trade Organization, Taiwan is denied representation in world affairs. It is recognized only by 22 countries, mostly Pacific Island states and small Latin American nations. Even in bodies such as the World Health Organization and UNICEF, Taiwan is denied a seat. Today, Taiwan can only participate in the Olympics as Chinese Taipei, and negotiations for a seat as an observer in the WTO are underway. Despite centuries of cultural and political divergence, the People's Republic of China and the international community continue to deny the people of Taiwan their right to self-determination and equal status among nations.